Hey team, and welcome back to the channel. I hope you're ready for a groundbreaking video. In the football space, teams are always selling players on development and getting to the next level. So I decided to do a project, a quick look at which countries are actually producing the top players. No opinions, no excuses, just raw data. So this way we can objectively see who's doing the best job, how the US stacks up, and maybe even implement some of their ideas. To start, I wanted to use objective metrics to measure player development. To do this, I started with the number of players in the top 5 leagues, those being the Premier League, La Liga, Serie A, the Bundesliga, and then Liga. I know some will say that the Portuguese league has been ranked higher by UEFA, but in general, the best players move to the leagues with the highest wages. And even without PSG, the French teams generally pay more than the Portuguese ones. Because of this, in general, I think they're more competitive when it comes to signing the best players. And that's what I want to look at, where the best players are. So that's why I'm looking at these leagues as a more objective metric than looking at international rankings, because I'm interested in individual development, not team success from international competitions, because we all know that a team unit is more than just the individual parts. So that's why you're going to see some teams not feature quite as much in this data as you might expect. It's also worth noting that this data is more relevant for men's football, so we are going to focus in on that. Female football is less established, so analyzing those trends is going to need a more complex analysis. From there, I looked at the number of players that played in these top 5 leagues based on their nationalities, and then ranked the top 50 countries with the most players. And it was no surprise that the countries with the most featured players were the domestic countries of those leagues, where you had Spain at the top with 452 players, with a significant drop-off with France having 339 players, then Italy and Germany coming in 3rd and 4th positions, and England having the least of the top 5. This is no surprise because the English league does pay the best by far, so the league does import more foreign talent than any other, which pushes a lot of talented English players into the championship in lower divisions. It is also worth noting that, unsurprisingly, Brazil and Argentina have the most imports outside of Europe. And this is significant because there are added challenges for players to come to Europe when they are from Brazil or Argentina. For example, it might be more difficult for them to obtain a work visa, or perhaps they simply have better offers in the Americas. It's also worth recognizing that if the Portuguese league was seen as the 5th league in this list, the data would probably look pretty different. Because as you would expect, there's a lot of Portuguese players playing in the Portuguese league, and the same thing goes with France. So had we switched those, the French numbers would probably be much lower, and the Portuguese numbers would be a lot higher. But Portugal still has a pretty strong representation with 60 players, as well as the Netherlands and Belgium, who are generally smaller countries with smaller populations. And as we move outside the top 10 developers of talent, you'll see different countries from Africa, Scandinavia, and Eastern Europe. And you'll even see at the 23rd position, the United States. And while those stats do tell some of the story, I did want to dive a little bit deeper. If you look at each entry, they are color-coded. And that's because each country has a different population and therefore a different number of registered youth players. And what I want to see is which countries are also most efficient at developing high-level players. Which system gets the most out of what they have? For example, it's not fair to compare a country like Brazil to a country like Croatia. Brazil has almost more players than Croatia has people, so it's no surprise that they produce a lot more players. So the color represents the percentage of players that make it to the top based on the total number of registered youth players. Now, every country's conversion rate is much lower than 1%, so these conversion rates are relative. But if you do have a green color, that means your conversion rate is pretty high. And then yellow would mean that you're somewhere in the middle, with orange being a little bit lower than that, and having a red color means your conversion rate is actually pretty poor. But again, this is in relation to the other 50 countries. So when we look at this scatter plot, the y-axis is showing the number of players that are produced in the top 5 leagues, and the x-axis shows the conversion rate, which means how efficient are you at producing players to play in those top 5 leagues. So if you look at this chart, it's pretty obvious that Spain, France, and Italy produce a lot of players, and they do so at a high rate. And even though England and Germany do produce a lot of players, they aren't as efficient when it comes to producing top-level talent. But that's also because these two have a super high participation rate, which means that the environment is just super competitive, which does artificially lower their conversion rate. But at the same time, you have countries like Switzerland, Denmark, and Croatia, which are kind of the opposite. They don't produce a lot of top-level players, but based on their participation, they're really efficient at making players. And honestly, these are great countries to play in if you want to make it to the next level, because they do produce a lot of good players, but there isn't a crazy amount of competition either. So if I was a young player trying to get started in Europe, I probably wouldn't go to a place like England or Germany. I would prefer to go somewhere like Switzerland, Denmark, and Croatia, just because the numbers are better. And based off other projects I've done, Portugal is amazing at exporting and producing talent, particularly at clubs like Benfica. So I'd expect them to be in the green as well if they were collected in the top 5 league. This is followed by some of the teams in the yellow, such as Belgium, the Netherlands, and Austria. But the point remains, these countries in the yellow and the green definitely are doing something that the red countries can learn from. From there, if we slide over and zoom in, we can get a deeper analysis of these red countries. The obvious standouts are Brazil and Argentina. They clearly produce a lot of players, but based on this criteria, they're not super efficient at producing players in the top 5 leagues. Often a lot of their players do end up playing in the Americas, so I wouldn't look too much into the stat. And what also works against them is similarly to England and Germany, they have a ton of players, and they all can't make it to the pro divisions. So that competition does lower their conversion rate. But this is good information to know, because just because a country is a powerhouse doesn't mean that's the best place for you to have success. You want to go to the places that give you the highest likelihood of success, which might also mean having lower competition. From there, the rest of the nations have similar challenges. They have small populations like Slovenia or Uruguay, or they have clear financial limitations such as the Ivory Coast. And many of these countries are not in Europe, which again deflates their stats even more. For example, Morocco has been performing well and developing players. They just don't play in the top European leagues. But what I do want to zoom in is a country that is all the way to the left, the United States. The stats are interesting, but they aren't super surprising, to be honest. This is because even though we have a respectable 24 players in the top 5 leagues, which puts us at 23rd in the world, the efficiency that we do this is exceptionally low. It's by far the lowest of the top 50 countries. And this isn't just a coach whining about it. Here's the proof. We have almost 3 million registered youth players, more than any other nation, and we also spend a ton of money on football. Our federation spends the 7th most, with the top 5 nations and Brazil being the only nations that spend more through their FAs. But if you did include the amount spent by parents, we would blow these other countries out of the water, where the number gets into the billions, which makes us by far the top spending country. So this proves what we already know. The United States soccer system is extremely inefficient at producing talent, and it's hurting our players. So maybe we can learn not just from the heavyweights, but from some of the smaller countries as well. But I am aware that I can't change the US soccer system by myself. What I can do though, is I can educate players on what's holding us back and how to increase our chances. So stay tuned for my next video where I'll be exposing why the US youth system is so inefficient.